The California State Prison at Lancaster was a place of silence. The kind that hums between steel and concrete, echoing through corridors where hope had long been stripped away. The walls were pale and unfeeling, covered in years of grime and rules. But one morning in 2014, a streak of color broke through the gray. On the east yard wall, a mural was rising. 1,000 shades of blue, green, and amber spilled from the brushes of men who once thought they'd never touch anything beautiful again. These were lifers, felons, the forgotten. Yet here they were, painting redemption one stroke at a time. Among them was Jesse Krimes, a quiet man with sharp eyes and calloused hands, serving time for a non-violent drug charge. His name, ironic as it sounded, had followed him like a shadow. Krimes, the criminal. He barely spoke during group sessions, preferring instead to draw on scraps of paper or the backs of letters. His art was his language, and for years he had spoken only to himself. But inside the prison's new arts collective program, something changed. For the first time, the men were given brushes instead of brooms. The initiative, run by visiting professors and volunteer artists, encouraged inmates to tell their stories through painting, poetry, and sculpture. It wasn't just about creativity, it was about survival. Jesse had no idea this program would become his salvation. He began with simple sketches, faint, fragile outlines of faces and eyes. But those eyes haunted him. They weren't strangers. They were the faces of people he'd wronged, people he'd loved, people he couldn't forget. Each night, when the lights went out, he tore pieces from prison-issued bedsheets and smuggled them into his cell. He began painting in secret, using makeshift pigments made from soap, hair gel, and newspaper ink. The guards never noticed, or maybe they didn't care. Every night, under the dim blue glow of his cell light, Jesse turned confinement into creation. His tiny 8x10 cell became a studio, the air thick with the scent of ink and quiet defiance. Over the years, his art transformed into something larger, literal and symbolic. He painted sprawling surrealist murals, thousands of small pieces that, when combined, would form something vast, something he couldn't even see in full. He called it Apokaluptein 1638967. But to him, it wasn't about apocalypse. It was revelation. The secret operation grew. He'd pass painted sheets to inmates working in the laundry, who'd sneak them out through the system. From there, they reached friends outside, piece by piece, like a puzzle being mailed out of a cage. It was an underground act of rebellion, art against the system. He wasn't the only one finding meaning through creation. Across the yard, other inmates were painting their memories. One man drew his childhood home in Detroit, another painted his daughter's eyes from memory. Some sculpted faces they hadn't seen in decades. The prison had become something unexpected, a place of transformation. But it didn't sit well with everyone. Some guards thought it was a distraction, a waste of state funds. "They don't deserve art," one of them muttered as he walked past the studio. Yet others saw what it was doing. Inmates who once started fights now helped each other mix colors. Men who'd never spoken shared brushes, told stories, and for the first time, listened. For Jesse, it was therapy. It was confession. "I'm not painting who I am," he told one volunteer. "I'm painting who I want to be." By 2015, word of his secret murals had leaked beyond the walls. The fragments, hundreds of small painted panels, had been assembled outside by supporters. The final piece spanned more than 40 feet, a surreal dreamscape of angels, bars, and fractured faces. Criticus has called it a masterpiece of confinement, but inside, Jesse didn't care about fame. He still had years left to serve. And every time he painted another panel, he felt a growing sense of purpose and fear. Because not everyone inside wanted him to keep creating. One evening, as he returned from the art room, Jesse found his supplies missing. His brushes gone. His sheets replaced with fresh ones, blank and sterile. Someone had cleared his space, and no one admitted to it. That night, a note appeared on his bunk. 4 words, scrawled in pencil. Art won't save you. Jesse stared at it for hours. It wasn't a threat, not exactly. It was a reminder. The prison didn't forgive. The world outside didn't forget. But he had already chosen his path. When the next morning came and the guards opened his cell, Jesse didn't speak. He just walked back to the art room, picked up a brush, and began again. This time painting not for freedom, not for redemption, but for truth. Because even inside the darkest places, truth still had color, and he was determined to make the world see it. The following months blurred together, not in monotony, but in motion. The Prison Arts Collective had changed something inside Lancaster's walls. Every session felt like a storm of color breaking against gray concrete. But for Jesse Krimes, it had become more than just therapy. It was a revolution painted in secret. The outside world had started to notice. Journalists were writing about the inmate artist smuggling murals from his cell. Galleries were asking questions. And somewhere beyond the razor wire and floodlights, curators were already calling his work a voice from the void. But Jesse didn't know any of that. Inside, he was just trying to survive. One day during an art class, a volunteer named Elena Morales, an art therapist from UCLA, brought in photographs of the inmate's finished mural, fully assembled for the first time on a warehouse wall in Los Angeles. She laid the photo on the table. The men stared in silence. There it was. Their work, massive and alive. It was as if the pieces of their souls, torn and scattered, had been reassembled into something whole. Jesse leaned in closer. He recognized the brushstrokes, the faces, the wings he'd painted years ago. For a moment, the room wasn't a prison. It was a gallery. "Do you see this?" Elena whispered. "This is what freedom looks like." For the first time in years, Jesse smiled. But not everyone in the yard shared that hope. As news of the murals spread, resentment grew. Some inmates mocked the artists. "Painting your way out?" they'd say. Others accused Jesse of using the program to gain attention, calling him Hollywood. It was jealousy, but it was also pain. The kind that eats through walls and souls alike. Then came the tension with the guards. A new warden had taken over Lancaster, one less sympathetic to rehabilitation through art. Budget cuts were announced, supplies were rationed, paint third. Inner, brushes, even paper became contraband again. The art room fell silent. Jesse tried to keep the spirit alive. He started teaching cell block art sessions, pencil sketches on envelopes, charcoal portraits on lunch bags. Word spread that Krimes was teaching again. Soon the hallway outside his cell was lined with folded sketches, men waiting to trade ideas, techniques, hope. It wasn't rebellion. Not really. It was survival. In the stillness of lockdown nights, Jesse would stare at his unfinished murals and think of the world outside, the color of grass, the smell of wet paint, the sound of laughter that didn't echo through bars. His art had become a bridge between two worlds, the one he'd lost and the one he was still creating. Then came the letter that changed everything. One morning, during mail call, a guard dropped a thick envelope onto his bunk. No return address. Inside was a printed article from the New York Times. Inmate artists' work featured in New York exhibition, a masterpiece born in confinement. Jesse froze. Someone had taken his story beyond the walls. His art had traveled further than he ever could, across the country, across minds. The article spoke of transcendence, of art-defying bars. It mentioned his name, his story, his sentence, Some guards congratulated him quietly. Others mocked him. "Guess you're famous now," one said with a smirk. But fame wasn't freedom. When Eleanor visited next, she told him, "You've done something that few ever do. You've turned confinement into conversation." He looked up from his sketchbook. "It doesn't feel like enough?" "Maybe it's not supposed to," she replied. "Maybe it's supposed to start something." Those words sank into him deeper than any sentence ever could. That night, he wrote a note and slipped it under the art room door. Even if they take away the paint, they can't erase the vision. Over the next weeks, Jesse began painting his most ambitious piece yet, a massive self-portrait surrounded by wings, bars, and blurred faces, each one representing someone he had met in prison. He worked quietly, hiding panels beneath his bunk, folding them carefully like prayers. One by one, the pieces were smuggled out again. Outside, the Prison Arts Collective had grown into a movement. Former inmates, now free, were teaching art workshops, hosting exhibitions, speaking on panels about creativity and change. The project Jesse had started in silence was becoming something bigger, a network of second chances stitched together by paint, courage, and memory. But inside, tension brewed once again. A guard found a smuggled package during inspection, a rolled bedsheet covered in color. They traced it back to Jesse. His cell was searched, his brushes confiscated. They called it contraband. He called it expression. When the warden questioned him, Jesse said only one thing: "You can take away my tools, but you can't take away what they built inside me." For that, he spent a week in solitary. But even there, surrounded by 4 blank walls, he drew invisible lines with his fingers, patterns only he could see. To him, the walls weren't closing in. They were becoming another canvas. When the cell doors opened that morning in 2017, Jesse Krimes stepped out a free man. But freedom, he realized, wasn't as loud as he expected. It wasn't sirens or applause. It was quiet, fragile, and painted in shades of uncertainty. He looked around, blinking against the sunlight after years of cold fluorescent light. The air felt thin, almost artificial. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the absence of something. No walls, no guards, no steel doors clanging shut behind him. Only open sky, vast and blue, like the paint he'd never been allowed to use. Outside, the world had already heard his name. His art had traveled to New York, Philadelphia, even Paris. His story, the inmate who painted freedom from behind bars, had become a symbol of transformation. But to Jesse, fame meant nothing if it didn't change something deeper. The first few months were disorienting. The noise of cities overwhelmed him. Cars honking, people shouting, colors too bright to be real. He moved into a small apartment, bare except for a single canvas, a stack of brushes, and a window that faced east. Every morning, he painted the sunrise as if trying to capture what freedom felt like. But the ghosts of prison followed him. He still dreamed of the blue walls, the clang of metal doors, the faces of men he left behind. Some of them had never even seen their own murals finished. Others had died before they could. He carried their stories like hidden sketches inside him. Then, one evening, a letter arrived. This time, not from a journalist, but from Elena Morales, the art therapist who had once handed him that photograph of the mural. It was short. "We're starting something new, a traveling exhibit, not just art, but stories. We want you to lead it." He read it twice, then smiled. Weeks later, in a converted warehouse gallery in Los Angeles, Jesse stood before the full mural. Apokaluptein 9638967, now complete, hanging high above the floor. It was massive, alive with color, and pieced together like the map of a fractured soul. Onlookers stood in silence, tracing the brushstrokes that had once been smuggled out through prison laundry. When the lights dimmed and the spotlight hit the center panel, Jesse stepped forward to speak. His voice trembled at first. "I started this work in a cell," he said. "Every piece you see here passed through bars, through hands, through fear. It isn't about me. It's about everyone who thought they were invisible and found a way to be seen." The room stayed silent for a long moment. Then applause erupted. Not the wild kind, but slow, heavy, heartfelt. After the exhibition, people came up to him. Students, former inmates, even prison guards. One man said, "I saw your work while I was still locked up. It made me believe something good could still come from me." That night, Jesse went back to his apartment and opened a fresh canvas. But instead of painting walls or cages, he painted light, endless, unbroken light. In the years that followed, his art became part of a movement. The Prison Arts Collective expanded across California, bringing brushes and notebooks into cells once ruled by silence. Classes grew, murals multiplied, and more inmates began to tell their stories through color instead of violence. Jesse visited prisons, mentoring new artists. Some of them still called him Krimes, others teacher, but he didn't correct them. He'd turned his name, his burden, into his purpose. In an interview, a reporter asked him, "Do you ever think art can really change people?" He thought for a moment, then said, "It already did. It changed me." Now, his murals hang in galleries across the world, but his favorite pieces are still the ones made inside. The smuggled fragments, the hidden prayers, the colors painted in defied, ants of despair. In one interview, he said something that still echoes in documentaries and classrooms today. "You can lock up the body, you can silence the voice, but you can't cage imagination. It finds a way out, one color at a time." And so, in the same place where walls once defined him, Jesse Krimes found his redemption not in escaping prison, but in escaping the version of himself that entered it. Behind bars, he learned that art wasn't about beauty. It was about survival. It was a way to breathe when the air felt too thin, to dream when reality was too small. Today, the murals remain, faded in some places, repaired in others. A testimony that even in the darkest corners of the human story, creation can still bloom. They call it the Prison Arts Collective. But those who lived it know the truth. It isn't about prison. It's about what happens when someone trapped in silence finally learns to speak, in color. If you think this story was intense, the next one will leave you speechless.